The twin suns of Scorzar 9 blazed mercilessly in the cloudless sky, casting harsh shadows across the fractured landscape of rock spires and endless dunes. Heat waves distorted the horizon, creating a shimmering mirage that seemed to mock the parched survey team as they established their base camp. Logan Pierce squinted against the glare, adjusting the environmental controls on his expedition suit. Unlike his alien companions, he had insisted on bringing manual override capabilities for all his equipment, a quirk that had earned him quiet derision during their journey aboard the Federation vessel. Now, as the 6th hour of their first day on this forsaken world stretched on, he was beginning to appreciate his own paranoia. "Water synthesis failing on all units," announced Commander Voker, his scaled brow furrowing deeply as he tapped the holographic readout hovering above his wrist. The Draconian's normally imposing presence seemed diminished somehow, concern etching itself across his reptilian features. "System reports. 0 atmospheric moisture detected. This contradicts our orbital scans." Logan raised an eyebrow but remained silent. As the sole human specialist on this multi-species expedition, he had learned when to speak and when to observe. The Federation survey mission had assembled top experts from 5 sentient species, and his inclusion had been controversial at best. Humans were still considered primitives by many council worlds, tolerated for their adaptability, but dismissed for their technological inferiority. "Impossible," declared Mera, the Telnari scientist whose translucent skin pulsed with bioluminescent patterns that shifted from troubled blue to agitated green. The preliminary readings showed trace humidity, enough for the synthesizers to function. Her tendrilled appendages danced over her own console, recalibrating and scanning again. The Yangar twins, Kran and Soru, hovered nearby in their anti-gravity domes. The amphibious siblings required constant moisture to survive, their greenish-blue skin already showing signs of stress despite the protective environment of their bubbles. "Our reserves will last 36 hours at current consumption rates," Kran noted, voice warbling through the translator. "Not accounting for increased exertion." Logan glanced toward the final member of their team, the crystalline engineer whose name was unpronounceable in human language. The silicon-based life form stood perfectly still, absorbing the solar radiation that sustained it, while interfacing directly with the camp's central AI. It made no comment, but the prismatic shifts in its structure suggested agitation. "Begin conservation protocols," Vokur commanded, straightening to his full 3-meter height. "The Federation will not abort a priority survey over a technical malfunction. We adapt and continue." But adaptation proved more challenging than anticipated. By nightfall, when the twin suns finally dipped below the jagged horizon, disaster struck. A piercing alarm shattered the relative quiet of the camp, followed by panicked movement as the team converged on the Yangar habitat domes. Kran's protective bubble had failed, the anti-gravity generators sputtering and dying as the amphibian writhed in obvious distress. Within seconds, Logan watched in horror as the moisture evaporated from the alien skin, leaving it cracked and discolored. Soru screamed, a haunting sound that required no translation, while Mera's luminescence flared bright yellow in alarm. The crystalline engineer moved with surprising speed, interfacing with the fallen dome's controls. But the damage was done. "Medical pod, now!" Voker roared, lifting the desiccated form of Kran with uncharacteristic gentleness. Hours later, the mood in the command tent was somber. Kran had been stabilized, but remained critical, suspended in one of their precious few remaining liters of water and heavily sedated. The camp's medical AI delivered its verdict without emotion. Critical dehydration across all cellular structures. Multiple organ failure imminent without substantial hydration. "The synthesizers are not malfunctioning," Mera announced quietly, her light patterns dim to conserve energy. "There is genuinely no atmospheric moisture on this planet's surface. The orbital readings detected water locked deep in subterranean aquifers. not accessible vapor. That contradicts all known planetary development models, Volker growled, pacing the confined space. Even desert worlds maintain a minimal hydrological cycle. Logan cleared his throat, drawing surprised glances from his colleagues. Permission to speak, Commander. Volker waved a clawed hand impatiently. This is hardly the time for protocol, human. If you have something useful to contribute, speak. Scorzar 9 isn't actually defying planetary development models, Logan said, pulling out his antiquated paper notebook, another eccentricity that had raised eyebrows during mission prep. It's just operating on a different timescale. The readings suggest a world in transition, losing its surface water over millennia rather than maintaining equilibrium. Mara's bioluminescence pulsed with interest. Explain. Logan flipped through his notes, stopping at a hand-drawn diagram. On Earth, we have places called dew points, conditions where atmospheric water vapor condenses into liquid. Here, the temperature differential between day and night creates something similar, but on a planetary scale. The moisture isn't gone. It's just never in vapor form during daylight hours when we can access it. The crystalline being shifted, refracting light in a pattern that their translators interpreted as skepticism. So our synthesizers are useless, Volker concluded grimly. They require vapor to function. Not necessarily useless, Logan replied, sketching rapidly in his notebook. We just need to create the right conditions to extract what little moisture does, cycle through the air during the thermal transitions. With what? Soru asked bitterly, from the corner, where they had been monitoring their twins' life signs. The backup synthesizers are offline too. Logan held up his completed sketch. It was simple, almost primitive by Federation standards, showing a shallow pit covered with angled transparent material, with a collection container at the center. It's called a solar still, he explained. Ancient desert cultures on Earth use them to survive. The sun heats the ground, causing what little moisture exists to evaporate. It rises, hits the cooler surface of the cover, condenses, and runs down to a collection point. Silence greeted his suggestion. Then Volker laughed, a harsh barking sound. You propose to save a Federation survey team with a hole in the ground and a piece of plastic? Logan met the commander's gaze steadily. I propose to supplement our dwindling supplies with a proven method that requires no power and can't break down. It won't be much at first, but multiple stills could make the difference between completing the mission and evacuation. Or worse. His eyes flicked meaningfully toward the medical pod where Cran floated unconscious. Mara's skin rippled with thoughtful pulses. The principle is sound, but the yield would be minimal. Better than nothing, Logan countered. And we can improve the design with materials we have on hand. Thermal film from the emergency shelters would increase efficiency. Tubing from the non-functional synthesizers could create condensation channels. Volker stared at the human for a long moment, then gave a curt nod. You have until midday tomorrow to prove your concept. If it fails, we abort the mission. Logan didn't waste a moment. As the others retreated to their quarters to rest and conserve energy, he gathered materials from around the camp. The thermal film was easily repurposed, its molecular structure designed to redirect heat. The containers proved more challenging, but he eventually salvaged enough parts from damaged equipment to create 3 prototype stills. He worked through the night, setting up his crude water traps at varying distances from camp. By dawn, he was exhausted but hopeful, having positioned each still to maximize the temperature differential as the twin suns rose. The first check was disappointing. Only a few precious drops had collected in each container, barely enough to wet his fingertip. But Logan refused to be discouraged. He adjusted the angles, deepened the pits, and expanded the collection surfaces. By midday, when Volker emerged from the command tent to inspect his progress, Logan had collected nearly 50 milliliters of pure water. Not enough to sustain the team, but proof the concept worked. It's minimal, Voker acknowledged grudgingly, examining the small collection vessel. It's a start, Logan countered. With 20 stills operating at this efficiency, we could generate a liter per day, enough to keep Cran stable while we complete essential survey work. Mara, who had accompanied the commander, leaned closer to examine the simple apparatus. The design could be improved, she murmured, her skin pulsing with calculating patterns. If we integrated the thermal properties of the film with a molecular sieve. Logan nodded eagerly. Exactly. And if we position them in a radial pattern around areas with subsoil temperature variances. This is still primitive technology, Voker interrupted, though his tone had lost some of its dismissiveness. Sometimes primitive works when advanced fails, Logan replied simply. The commander was silent for a long moment. Proceed with your improvements, he finally ordered. Mara will assist. I expect a full liter by tomorrow's report. It was as close to approval as Logan was likely to get. He and Mara set to work immediately, expanding the network of solar stills and incorporating her suggestions for improved collection methods. By nightfall, they had constructed 15 functioning units, positioned strategically around the camp perimeter. The next morning brought both triumph and deeper concern. The stills had produced just over 800 milliliters of water, not quite the liter Voker had demanded, but close enough to validate the approach. However, Soru's dome was now showing signs of instability, its moisture recycling system struggling against the bone-dry atmosphere. We need more. Much more, Logan muttered, running calculations in his notebook while Mara adjusted the molecular structure of their collection films. At this rate, we're just postponing failure. The crystalline engineer, who had been silently observing their work, suddenly approached. It extended a faceted appendage toward Logan's notebook, refracting light in a complex pattern. It's suggesting we use drone components, Mara translated, her bioluminescence brightening with excitement. The survey drones have heat sink panels that could dramatically increase condensation efficiency. Logan grinned. Perfect! And if we cannibalize the medical diagnostic equipment for tubing, we could create a centralized collection system. Over the next 3 days, the team transformed from skeptics to collaborators. Even Voker contributed, using his superior strength to dig deeper collection pits in the rocky soil. Soru, though weakened by concern for their twin, provided crucial insights about optimal fluid dynamics for the collection channels. Their persistence began to pay off. Water production increased to nearly 5 liters daily, enough to stabilize Cran and maintain minimum hydration for the others. The crisis wasn't over, but they had bought valuable time. The Federation vessel reports it can advance its extraction schedule by 3 days. Voker announced during the evening briefing on their 5th-day planetside. Assuming we complete the primary survey objectives. That's still 11 days away, Mara noted, her luminescence dim to conserve energy. Our current water production is sufficient for survival, but not for extensive field work. Then we increase production further, Logan insisted. The principle works. We just need scale. The crystalline engineer emitted a series of light patterns that gave everyone pause. What do you mean, magnetic anomalies? Voker demanded, turning to the silicon-based being. More complex patterns followed, which Mara translated with growing concern. It's detected increasing fluctuations in the planet's magnetic field, consistent with pre-storm conditions in systems with twin suns. Logan frowned. Would a magnetic storm affect our water collection? It would affect everything, Voker growled. Communications, navigation, power systems. Even our environmental suits rely on electromagnetic seals. A heavy silence fell over the team. They had solved one crisis only to face another. How long? Logan finally asked. The crystalline engineer's response needed no translation. The prismatic shifts in its structure clearly communicated uncertainty. We proceed with the survey, Voker decided. Maximum efficiency, Minimum time exposure. Teams of 2. No one goes alone. Logan, your water collection system becomes our highest priority after essential readings. The next 3 days passed in a blur of frantic activity. The team pushed themselves to the limit, gathering critical data while continuously expanding the water collection network. Logan barely slept, dividing his time between maintaining the stills and joining Mara on survey expeditions to the nearest rock formations. They had expanded to 40 functioning solar stills when the first signs of the magnetic storm appeared. It began subtly, minor fluctuations in their communication systems, intermittent errors in the environmental suit readouts. But by the evening of their 9th day on Scores R9, there was no denying the approaching danger. "The storm front will reach us within 18 hours, Voker announced grimly, displaying the projection map over the command table. Full electromagnetic disruption, no communications, no power systems, no electronic life support. Soru, who had been maintaining a constant vigil beside Cran's medical pod, looked up in alarm. "The stabilization field will fail," Voker confirmed, "as will your dome's integrity systems." "We need to evacuate," Mara said, her bioluminescence pulsing rapid patterns of distress. "Call the Federation vessel now, while communications are still possible." Voker's scaled features hardened. "The vessel is on the far side of the system, conducting critical antimatter collection. Even at maximum burn, they cannot reach us before the storm hits." "Then we're trapped," Soru whispered. Logan, who had been studying the projection map intently, suddenly straightened. "Maybe not. There's a ridge formation here." He pointed to a location approximately 23 kilometers from their position. "Elevated, with significant ferrous content in the stone. It could provide natural shielding from the worst of the magnetic effects." 23 kilometers across open desert? Mara's skin flashed incredulously. "With no functioning navigation or environmental systems?" "On foot," Logan confirmed, "carrying whatever water we've collected and whatever supplies we can manage without powered assistance." "Impossible," Voker declared. "Cran cannot be moved in their condition, and Soru's dome will fail within hours of the storm's arrival." Logan met the commander's gaze. "With respect, sir, remaining here is a death sentence for all of us. At the ridge, we have a chance." The debate raged for hours, growing more desperate as their communication system deteriorated, providing stark evidence of the storm's approach. In the end, necessity overcame objection. They would attempt the journey. Dawn found them preparing for the desperate march. They had constructed a hand-drawn map based on their limited survey data, calculated the position of the suns for navigation, and distributed the essentials among them. Cran, still unconscious but stabilized, was secured in a makeshift travois that Voker would pull. Logan had devised a portable version of his solar still that could be deployed during brief rest periods, while Mara salvaged critical medical supplies. Most heartbreaking was the decision about what to leave behind. Years of scientific research, irreplaceable equipment, personal possessions, all abandoned in favor of survival necessities. "The Federation values lives over data," Voker reminded them as they prepared to depart. "We return together, or not at all." They set out just as the first sun crested the horizon, hoping to cover significant distance before the full heat of midday. Logan led the way, using his expedition training to set a sustainable pace. Mara followed, her bioluminescence serving as a visual link between team members. The crystalline engineer moved effortlessly across the rocky terrain, occasionally scouting ahead to identify the easiest path. Voker came next, pulling Cran's travois with grim determination, while Soru brought up the rear, their dome already showing signs of strain from the preliminary magnetic fluctuations. The first few hours passed without incident. They maintained silence to conserve energy, communicating only when necessary through hand signals Logan had taught them. The landscape grew increasingly rugged as they left the relatively flat terrain, near their abandoned camp, forcing them to navigate through narrow canyons between towering rock spires. By midday, they had covered nearly 8 kilometers. Good progress, but not enough to reach safety before the storm hit. They paused in the shadow of a massive formation, rationing precious water and deploying Logan's portable still to capture what moisture they could during their brief rest. "How is Cran?" Logan asked quietly, as Soru checked their twins' condition. "Stable," Soru replied, voice strained through their translator. "But the medical pod's power reserves are dropping faster than anticipated. And your dome?" Soru's large eyes blinked slowly. 15 hours at current degradation rates, perhaps less if the magnetic interference intensifies. Which it would, Logan knew. He exchanged glances with Mara, whose diminished luminescence reflected his own concern. "We should continue," Voker announced, rising to his impressive height. "The second sun will reach zenith soon. We must cover maximum distance before full heat." They pressed on, but the going became increasingly difficult. The terrain grew more treacherous, forcing them to make detours that cost precious time and energy. Worse, the early effects of the magnetic storm began to manifest more strongly. Their translators glitched intermittently, and the environmental suit's cooling systems fluctuated unpredictably. By late afternoon, they had covered another 7 kilometers, but exhaustion was taking its toll. Mara's bioluminescence had dimmed to a faint glow, conserving energy, but making it harder for the team to maintain visual contact. Voker showed no outward signs of fatigue, but Logan noticed the commander's breathing had become labored as he pulled Cran's travois across the increasingly difficult terrain. Most concerning was Soru's condition. The amphibian's dome had begun to flicker visibly, its integrity compromised by the growing magnetic interference. Despite rationing, their personal water supply was dangerously low, with another 8 kilometers still to go. "We need to rest," Logan decided, as the second sun began its descent. "Just enough to recover and collect what moisture we can before continuing through the night." Vokur looked ready to object, but then nodded curtly. 1 hour, no more." They found shelter in a shallow cave, formed by overlapping rock slabs. Logan immediately set up 3 portable stills, positioning them to maximize the last rays of the setting suns. The crystalline engineer interfaced with Cran's medical pod, attempting to stabilize its failing systems, while Mara used her diminished bioluminescence to provide light in the deepening shadows. "Commander," Logan said quietly, moving to where Voker stood guard at the cave entrance. "We need to discuss contingency plans." The draconian's scaled features remained impassive. "Explain." "At our current pace, we won't reach the ridge before Soru's dome fails completely, and Cran's pod is losing power faster than anticipated." "What do you propose?" Logan hesitated, then committed to the difficult truth. "We need to prioritize. The strongest among us should push ahead at maximum speed to reach the ridge, then return with whatever materials we can use to shield the others." Vokur's reptilian eyes narrowed. "You suggest abandoning team members." "I suggest saving those we can," Logan countered. "You and the crystalline engineer could cover the remaining distance in half the time, without the rest of us slowing you down." "Out of the question," Voker growled. "The Federation does not—" "The Federation isn't here," Logan interrupted, a breach of protocol that drew a surprised hiss from the commander. "We are. And we're facing extinction if we don't adapt to changing circumstances." Their argument was cut short by a sudden cry from inside the cave. They rushed back to find Soru collapsed beside their twin's travois, the amphibian's protective dome flickering dangerously. "System failure imminent," Mara reported, her bioluminescence flaring with alarm as she tried to stabilize the dome's integrity. "The magnetic interference is accelerating." Logan made a split-second decision. "Transfer half the remaining water from Cran's pod to Soru's dome. Now." "That will compromise Cran's stability," Voker objected. "And doing nothing will kill Soru," Logan countered. "We need them both to survive." After a moment's hesitation, Voker nodded his approval. They worked quickly, siphoning precious water from one life support system to another, knowing they were balancing lives against each other with every drop. The emergency intervention bought them time, but solved nothing. As darkness fell completely, they faced the grim reality that they would need to continue their journey through the night, navigating by the light of unfamiliar stars, with failing equipment and dwindling resources. "No rest periods," Vokur announced, as they prepared to depart. "Continuous movement until we reach the ridge." Logan nodded, recalculating their route to account for the darkness. "I'll lead. Mara, can you maintain enough luminescence to mark our path?" The Telnari scientist's skin pulsed faintly. "For a few hours. No more." "It will have to do," Logan decided. "Commander, you and the crystalline engineer continue with Kran. I'll help Soru." The night march became a nightmare of exhaustion and growing desperation. Without the suit's environmental controls functioning properly, the desert's plummeting nighttime temperatures sapped their strength as mercilessly as the daytime heat had. They stumbled over unseen obstacles, lost precious minutes backtracking from dead ends, and rationed water with increasing stringency. Halfway through the night, disaster struck again. Mara collapsed without warning, her bioluminescence extinguishing completely. Logan rushed to her side, finding the Telnari scientist unresponsive, her translucent skin dry and papery to the touch. "Severe dehydration," he diagnosed, administering a precious few drops of water from his personal supply. "She can't continue without rest." Vokur surveyed their situation grimly. Kran remained unconscious in the failing medical pod. Soru was barely ambulatory, their dome flickering constantly now. Mara lay incapacitated. Only the crystalline engineer seemed unaffected by the brutal conditions, its silicon-based physiology actually thriving on the temperature extremes. "We have 5 kilometers remaining," the commander stated flatly. "Dawn in approximately 3 hours. Logan made another difficult decision. "You and the engineer go ahead with Kran. Maximum speed. Reach the ridge, establish shelter, then return for us. We'll continue at whatever pace we can manage." This time, Vokur didn't argue. The situation had deteriorated beyond protocol or preference. "You have the coordinates memorized?" Logan nodded. "Black twin spires, visible from the western approach. We'll find you." The commander hesitated, then placed a scaled hand on Logan's shoulder, a gesture of respect unprecedented in their interactions. "The Federation will know of your service, human, whatever the outcome." With that, Vokur and the crystalline engineer departed, moving with renewed purpose into the darkness, leaving Logan alone with 2 incapacitated team members and dwindling hope. He worked methodically, conserving energy while addressing the most critical needs. First, he stabilized Mara, using his expedition suit's manual thermal regulators to warm her slowly. Then, he reinforced Soru's failing dome with thermal film salvaged from their abandoned packs, creating a crude but effective barrier against the worst of the cold. When the first hints of dawn appeared on the horizon, Logan allowed himself a moment of grim satisfaction. They had survived the night, but the real test still lay ahead. The final approach to the ridge under the full heat of day, with the magnetic storm bearing down upon them. He roused his companions as the first sun rose, administering the last of their water in carefully measured doses. Mara revived slowly, her bioluminescence returning as a faint, uncertain glow. Soru was less responsive, but managed to stand with assistance. "Can you walk?" Logan asked them both. Mara nodded weakly. Soru made a gesture that their failing translator rendered as "must try." The final stretch of their journey became an exercise in sheer determination. The twin suns rose to their full, punishing height, baking the rocky landscape until heat waves distorted their vision. Their progress slowed to a crawl, a few hundred meters at a time, followed by brief rest periods during which Logan deployed his portable stills to capture what moisture they could. By midday, they had covered less than 2 kilometers. Mara was navigating largely by instinct now, her scientific training allowing her to interpret the geological formations around them. Soru had lapsed into semi-consciousness, forcing Logan to half-carry the amphibian across increasingly difficult terrain. The magnetic storm struck with surprising suddenness. One moment they were struggling forward under clear skies. The next, strange auroras rippled across the horizon, and every electronic device they still carried emitted a high-pitched whine before going completely dead. Soru's dome flickered one final time, then failed entirely, leaving the amphibian fully exposed to the planet's lethal atmosphere. Logan reacted instantly, tearing open his expedition suit and pulling Soru against his body, using his own perspiration to provide minimal moisture to the alien's desiccating skin. It was a desperate measure that compromised his own survival chances. But he didn't hesitate. 3 kilometers, Mara gasped, her luminescence flaring briefly with determination. I can see the spires. Indeed. The distinctive black formations were visible now, jutting against the horizon like accusing fingers, pointing to the sky. Somewhere at their base, Voker and the crystalline engineer would have established shelter, if they had made it. The final approach became a blur of pain and determination. Logan's world narrowed to the simple act of placing one foot in front of the other, dragging Soru's increasingly unresponsive form, while Mara stumbled alongside them. His exposed skin blistered under the twin suns, and his throat burned with thirst, but he refused to stop. When they finally reached the base of the black spires, Logan was nearly delirious from heat exposure and exhaustion. He dimly registered the natural cave formation ahead, the hastily erected shade structure, and then, miraculously, Voker emerging to help carry Soru's limp form into the relative cool of the shelter. "You made it," the commander rumbled, his normally stern voice tinged with something like amazement. "Course we did," Logan mumbled before darkness claimed him. He awakened to the sensation of cool moisture on his face. Opening his eyes, he found the crystalline engineer hovering over him, carefully administering water droplets from what appeared to be a sophisticated version of his solar still. "How long?" Logan croaked. 17 hours, came Voker's voice from nearby. The storm peaked 6 hours ago, beginning to abate now. Logan struggled to sit up, wincing at the pain from his sunburned skin. "The others?" "Alive," the commander replied. "Barely." The shelter they had established was crude, but effective. A natural cave enhanced with thermal barriers and multiple water collection systems. Logan recognized his own designs, improved upon, and expanded by the crystalline engineer's technical expertise. Soru lay near the cave entrance, their amphibious body wrapped in moisture-retaining film. The dome was gone, but a steady drip system provided constant hydration to their sensitive skin. Nearby, Cran's medical pod had been reinforced with protective materials, its power system bypassed in favor of a manual monitoring approach. Mara sat against the far wall, her bioluminescence still dim but stable, pulsing in a rhythm that suggested deep meditation or healing trance. "You've been busy," Logan observed, noting the extensive network of water collection channels that had been carved into the cave floor. "Your methods proved adaptable," Voker acknowledged. "The engineer enhanced the collection efficiency by 340%. The crystalline being shifted, refracting light in patterns that Logan had come to recognize as its form of communication. "It says the natural mineral content of these rock formations creates ideal condensation conditions," Voker translated. "We are producing nearly 12 liters per day." Logan whistled softly. "Enough to sustain us until extraction. If the Federation vessel can locate us," Voker reminded him. "Our communications are still non-functional, and will remain so until the magnetic storm disperses completely." "How long?" "Uncertain. 3 days. Perhaps 5. Logan considered their situation. They had shelter, water, and a defendable position. But without the ability to signal their location, they risked being overlooked during rescue operations. We need to create a visual marker, he decided. Something that can be seen from orbit once the storm clears. Over the next 2 days, as they all gradually recovered strength, they implemented Logan's plan, using materials from their salvaged equipment and natural resources from the surrounding area. They constructed a massive signal fire atop the taller of the twin spires. The crystalline engineer created a specialized fuel mixture that would produce distinctive colored smoke, visible even through the lingering atmospheric distortion from the magnetic storm. The waiting was the hardest part. They established routines, rationed supplies, and monitored each other's condition carefully. Cran finally regained consciousness on the 3rd day, weak but alive, reuniting with their twin in a touching moment that transcended species differences. On the 5th day, as the magnetic interference finally diminished to negligible levels, they lit the signal fire. Thick purple smoke billowed upward, creating a column visible for kilometers in all directions. "Now we wait," Volker said, standing beside Logan as they watched the smoke rise against the alien sky. "Now we wait," Logan agreed. The rescue, when it came, was almost anticlimactic. A Federation patrol vessel, dispatched when their primary transport lost contact, detected the smoke signal during a standard search pattern. Within hours, they were evacuated, dehydrated, exhausted, but alive against all odds. Later, aboard the Federation vessel as they recovered in the medical bay, Volker sought out Logan. "The Council will receive my full report on this mission," the commander stated formally. "I have recommended you for the Stellar Cross." Logan blinked in surprise. The Stellar Cross was the Federation's highest honor, rarely awarded, and never before to a human. "That's unnecessary, Commander." "It is entirely necessary," Volker countered. "Your actions preserved this team when our technology failed us. Your primitive methods proved more reliable than our advanced systems." "Not primitive," Logan corrected gently. "Just different. Sometimes the simplest solution is the most effective." Volker considered this, then inclined his head in acknowledgement. A lesson the Federation would do well to remember. As the massive starship accelerated away from Skorzar 9, Logan stood at the observation port, watching the desert world recede into the distance. Mara joined him, her bioluminescence now restored to its full vibrancy. "What will you do when we return?" she asked. Logan smiled. "Propose a modification to the standard Federation expedition kit. I think every survey team should carry materials for a solar still, don't you?" Mara's skin rippled with amusement. "I believe the Council might actually agree. After our report, you've changed perceptions, Logan. Not just about human adaptability, but about our over-reliance on technology." "Technology is a tool, not a solution," Logan replied, thinking of the simple water traps that had saved their lives. The universe has been solving problems for billions of years. Sometimes we just need to pay attention to its methods. As the stars streaked past in hyperspace, Logan found himself reflecting on the journey they had survived together. 5 species, each with different biologies, different needs, different perspectives. Yet, they had found common ground in crisis. Perhaps that was the real lesson of Skorzar 9. Not that technology could fail, but that cooperation and ingenuity could succeed where individual efforts would falter. He made a final note in his paper notebook, a habit now viewed with respect rather than derision by his alien colleagues. The greatest resource isn't water, or technology, or even knowledge. It's the will to survive together, adapting whatever tools we have to overcome whatever challenges we face. It was a lesson worth bringing home to Earth, and to all the worlds of the Federation beyond.